I never imagined that the land I crossed a desert to reach would one day betray me with the same hands I used to build it. My name is José Alejandro Ruiz. I am 41 years old, and for the last 17 years, I have lived in Florida. But before that, I was just another hungry boy in the dust of Guerrero, Mexico, dreaming of becoming someone in a world that never left space for people like me. Back home, I used to mix mud with my bare hands to help my father patch the roof during storms. We didn't have electricity most of the time. Dinner was often just tortillas and black beans. My dreams were shaped by stories from men who had crossed to El Norte and sent money back. They spoke of machines that served food with a button, supermarkets that smelled like soap, and beds that had actual mattresses instead of straw. At 15, I made a promise to my mother that one day I'd build her a house made of brick, not patched wood, not tin, real brick. That dream sat in my chest like a fire, impossible to put out. When I turned 24, I crossed the border with a backpack and 2 phone numbers, one for a cousin who never answered, and one for a stranger who charged me $400 for a ride from McAllen to Jacksonville. That was my first night in America, alone. No English, no bed, just a warehouse full of other men sleeping on flattened cardboard boxes. I worked my first job the next morning, 12 hours unloading crates at a grocery store. No breaks, $10 under the table. My hands bled, but I didn't care. It meant I had started. I was finally inside. The early years were nothing like the stories we heard back home. I shared a room with 3 other men in a tiny 2-bedroom apartment. We slept in shifts. If you were working the night shift, you got the mattress. If not, it was the floor. We cooked on a single electric stove and used our jackets to block out the light when someone had to sleep during the day. But still, we sent money home every month. I sent my first $200 after just 17 days in the country. My mother cried over the phone. I cried after we hung up. I remember every single corner I painted, every roof I hammered under the Florida sun. I remember the smell of sweat mixing with insulation. I remember my fingers cracking in the cold and still laying tile because every hour was worth $5, and every $5 got me closer to the dream. I never took a vacation, never went to the beach, even though I was 30 minutes away. I wasn't here to relax. I was here to build something for them, for me, for the little boy back in Guerrero who swore he'd never settle for patchwork ceilings again. It was during one of those long construction days that I met Sofia. She was working part-time as a cleaner at the same site. She had a ponytail that always smelled like lavender, even when covered in dust. She laughed loudly, even when she was exhausted. We shared lunch one afternoon when I forgot mine. She gave me half of her torta and asked if I missed home. I said yes. She said she had stopped trying, that America was her new home now, for better or worse. We started seeing each other after work. Quiet dinners, long walks in old sneakers. We didn't have much, but there was comfort in the way she held my hand, like we both had survived the same war. Her story was like mine. Same struggles, same sacrifices. I thought, maybe, just maybe, we could build a life out of these broken pieces. After a year, we moved in together. Except now, not much changed. We split bills and took turns cooking. Sundays were our favorite. We made pozole and called our families. I used to watch her speak to her sister for hours, smiling like the world was still full of good people. I loved her more each day. And in the silence between work and exhaustion, I started to believe that maybe life was finally becoming kind to me. But life in America has a way of shifting without warning. One month, you're laying bricks for your future, and the next, you're watching it all collapse like drywall too wet to stand. The immigration checks started coming more often. Men we knew were disappearing, some fired, some taken, some never heard from again. And yet, I kept working, kept building, kept believing, because that's what they teach you as an immigrant. Work harder, speak less, keep your head down. Maybe you'll be spared, maybe you'll be lucky. But no one tells you what to do when the danger comes, not from strangers or police, but from the people you love the most. If you've ever given your heart to someone who made you feel safe, just to watch them hand it over to the very people trying to destroy you, leave a comment below and tell your story. Just write, I trusted someone who betrayed me. Your story might give courage to someone who's still suffering in silence. And if you believe stories like this need to be told, subscribe to this channel. Every new follower is like a hand on our back, reminding us that we are not alone in this fight. At first, it was little things, barely noticeable changes that I convinced myself were just part of life, part of growing up together. Sofia would forget to answer my text. She'd say she left her phone in her locker, or that she was too busy cleaning the last office to notice. And I believed her. I wanted to believe her. When you spend years building something with someone brick by brick, you don't question every crack. You patch it and keep going. That's what I thought love was. She started coming home late, not by much, just 30 minutes here, an hour there. Sometimes she'd say she stayed behind to help a coworker. Sometimes she'd say traffic. One night, she walked in smelling like a perfume I had never smelled before. Something expensive, soft, too soft for a janitor's uniform. When I asked, she smiled and said one of the ladies at work sprayed her just for fun. I laughed, she laughed, and just like that, I let it go. But the moments kept piling up. She stopped asking how my day was. We used to talk about everything. Now she would eat in silence while scrolling on her phone. And when I leaned in to kiss her, she turned her head like it was reflex. Like love had become a habit she was trying to break. I told myself maybe she was tired. Maybe life was just hard. I didn't want to imagine anything else. I started working more overtime, partly to give us some space, partly to avoid the growing weight between us at home. I thought if I worked harder, brought home more money, fixed the bathroom tiles she always said she hated, maybe things would feel right again. I even bought her a new phone on her birthday. She thanked me, kissed my cheek, and spent the rest of the evening texting someone I couldn't see. There was this one night I'll never forget. I got off early and decided to surprise her. I bought her favorite tacos from the truck down the street and even grabbed a small bottle of wine. When I walked in, I found her on the couch, quickly shutting off her phone. She looked surprised, not happy, just surprised. The kind of surprise that feels like guilt wrapped in denial. I asked who she was talking to. She said it was her sister. I nodded, and we ate in silence. You know that feeling when you start to realize someone is slowly backing away from you, and you can't stop them, no matter how hard you try? It's like standing on a frozen lake and watching the cracks form under your feet. You want to move, to run, but every step could be the one that makes it all collapse. I tried everything. I offered weekend trips, something small, a movie night, a walk by the beach. But she always had a reason to say no. Her feet hurt. She had to rest. She wasn't in the mood. I began to wonder if she was waiting for me to leave her, or worse, for me to do something wrong so she could walk away without guilt. But I didn't give her that. I stayed. I loved. I waited. One day, I noticed she had set a password on her phone. She had never done that before. When I asked, she said, people at work were getting their phones stolen. It made sense. Too much sense. The kind of answer that sounds rehearsed. I wanted to ask more. I wanted to grab the phone and see for myself, but I didn't. I told myself that trust meant letting go. What I didn't realize was that trust without truth is just denial. A week later, she left early for work, saying she had to cover a shift. But I forgot my lunch that day and decided to bring it to her. When I got to the building where she worked, I asked the front desk if Sofia was already there. They said no, she wasn't scheduled until 3. It was 10 in the morning. I stood outside for a long time, holding the bag of lunch like it was the only thing I still understood. My mind started spinning. Maybe they were wrong. Maybe she went somewhere else first. Maybe. But deep down, I knew something was unraveling. Something I had refused to see. The worst part about being lied to is not the lie itself. It's the feeling that the person lying to you no longer sees you as someone who deserves the truth. That's what hit me the hardest. Not the time she disappeared for hours, not the stories that didn't add up, but the fact that she looked me in the eyes every night and chose silence over honesty. When I finally confronted her, she got defensive, accused me of being paranoid, said my long hours at work had made me insecure. She turned it around so quickly, I started to believe maybe I was imagining it all, that maybe I was just tired, maybe I was becoming bitter. She was good with words. She had a way of making her explanations sound like facts, and my doubts feel like weaknesses. But the truth has a way of knocking, even when you refuse to answer the door. It started coming from others, mutual friends who stopped talking to me, whispered conversations that ended when I walked into the room, looks of pity I didn't understand at first, until I did. There was a man, a lawyer. I didn't know his name yet, but I would soon. And what I'd discover about him and Sofia would make every suspicion I ever had feel like a punch to the chest. But at that point, I still wanted to believe in her. I still hoped that love could fix what was breaking. I didn't know yet that I was loving someone who had already let go. Have you ever felt that slow, invisible shift when someone you love starts to treat you like a stranger? Leave a comment and share your story. Just write, "I felt them slipping away." Know who else needs to read that they are not the only one. And if this story is echoing something inside you, consider subscribing. Every person who joins this channel is a reminder that even in betrayal, we are never truly alone. It was still dark when I heard the knock. No, not a knock, a pounding, heavy, repetitive, like someone was trying to break the door down with their fists. I opened my eyes slowly, thinking it was a dream, but the sound kept coming. My heart immediately jumped to my throat. In my bones, I knew this wasn't a neighbor. This wasn't a package delivery. It was 5:17 in the morning. Sofia stirred beside me, but didn't say a word. She didn't ask who it could be. She didn't even sit up. That silence should have meant something to me. But in that moment, I was too focused on the dread flooding every cell of my body. I walked barefoot to the front door and peeked through the blinds. Flashlights, vests, letters in bold, ice. I remember freezing, not from cold, that paralyzing kind of fear that turns you into stone. You want to move, you want to scream, but your body forgets how. The only thing I could hear was the loud thumping of my own heart, trying to escape my chest. The banging came again, louder this time, accompanied by voices. Immigration enforcement. Open the door. I turned to Sofia. She was sitting up now, still calm, too calm. She pulled the blanket over her legs and stared at me. No panic, no questions, just a blank stare. Did you call? I asked. My voice didn't even sound like mine. She didn't answer, and I didn't wait. When I opened the door, 3 agents stepped inside before I could speak. One of them asked my name, but he already had it on paper. José Alejandro Ruiz. Date of birth, nationality. They didn't ask for ID. They already knew everything. They put me in handcuffs right there in my living room. Cold metal against warm wrists. The tightness wasn't physical. It was emotional. It wasn't just my hands they locked up. It was every part of my life I had spent years building. I tried to speak, to ask what was going on, but they only said I was being detained for violating immigration laws. They didn't need to explain more. I knew what that meant. I knew what it could lead to. As they walked me toward the door, I looked over my shoulder at Sofia. She was still sitting on the bed, not crying, not yelling, not even moving, just watching. The expression on her face was unreadable. I waited for her to say something, anything, but she didn't. The car ride was silent. I was in the back seat, wedged between 2 officers, staring out the window as we left my street, my life, my world behind. I saw the grocery store where I used to pick up eggs, the bench where I had once kissed Sofia after a night shift, all of it slipping away like a movie scene filmed in reverse. We arrived at a gray building surrounded by a tall metal fence, the ICE detention facility, the kind of place I had only heard about in the stories people whispered when they thought no one was listening. I never thought I would be inside one. They took my shoelaces, my belt, even my wedding ring. I asked to make a phone call. They gave me 5 minutes. I called Sofia. She didn't pick up. I left a message. "I don't know what's happening," I said, trying not to cry. "But I need you. Please answer." She never did. The intake process was cold, clinical. They gave me an orange jumpsuit and an ID badge with a number, not a name, number, A725493. I looked at it and felt myself disappearing, piece by piece. My name, my dignity, my right to be seen as a human being. They placed me in a cell with 3 other men, all immigrants, all scared. One was from Honduras, the other from Guatemala. The third, a man from Michoacan like me, had been detained after a routine traffic stop. None of us knew what would happen next. All we had were rumors. They told me my first hearing was scheduled for the following week, that I would have the chance to to make a case. But even the guards whispered that most cases didn't go well, especially now, especially under this administration. They said quotas were being enforced, that judges were being pressured to deport more people, faster. Every night I lay in a bed that felt colder than steel. I replayed everything in my head, every moment, every word, every silence. I started to piece things together, the way Sofia had stopped hugging me goodbye, the phone calls in the other room, the sudden tension whenever I mentioned our future. And then it hit me like a lightning bolt to the chest. They had too much information. ICE didn't just show up with a name. They had my address, my schedule, my employer, details that only someone close could have provided. Someone who lived with me, someone who knew my life better than anyone else. I refused to believe it at first. I held on to hope like a lifeline. But denial doesn't last long when the walls are closing in. And inside that cell, I had nothing but time to think. There was one moment, a few days into my detention, that I will never forget. A guard came to my cell and told me someone had dropped off a small bag of personal items for me. I opened it expecting a note, a message, a sign of support. But there was nothing, just a pair of old shoes and my work gloves. No letter, no phone number, no name. It was like someone was saying goodbye without having the courage to say it out loud. I sat on the edge of my bunk that night and stared at the shoes, the same ones I had worn every day to work, the same gloves I used to lay bricks, to build homes for strangers, to make a life for a woman who now treated me like a ghost. If you've ever had the ground pulled from under you by someone you loved with every part of your being, I want you to share your voice in the comments. Just type, "I was left in silence." You never know who might need to see those words today. And if stories like this help, you feel seen, like they're pulling the curtain back on what happens behind closed doors, I hope you'll subscribe. Every person here is part of something bigger than one voice. Together, we remember that we matter, even when the system says we don't. There are certain moments that split your life in two. Moments so vivid and brutal that you remember every sound, every breath, every second, like it was carved into your bones. For me, that moment came inside a freezing cold courtroom in downtown Tampa, under fluorescent lights that made everything feel like a dream I couldn't wake up from. They brought me into the immigration courtroom in shackles, chains around my wrists, around my ankles, a chain around my waist that made it hard to walk. The metal clinked with every step, echoing across the tile floor like I was some kind of criminal. But I wasn't. I had no record, no violence, no arrest history. I built houses for a living. I paid rent on time. I sent money to my mother every single month. And yet, there I was, hands bound, feet scraping forward, like someone awaiting sentencing for a crime I didn't even understand. The courtroom was small, not like what you see on television. No dramatic wood panels, no grand speeches, just a judge behind a plastic shield, a clerk typing without looking up, and a government attorney seated calmly, like he had done this 1,000 times. I looked around for a familiar face, hoping, praying maybe Sofia would be there, that maybe this was all a mistake and she would rush in and say something. But there was no one, not a friend, not a neighbor, not even the woman I had shared a life with for nearly a decade. The judge called my name. I stood, even though my legs trembled. My attorney had not yet arrived. I had been assigned one the day before, a public defender, a woman named Ana Delgado, young but sharp. She had spoken to me in a hallway, told me she would do everything she could, that I had rights, that we could fight this. Of her words could prepare me for what happened next. The judge announced that the government had received a detailed tip regarding my immigration status, that the information included my full name, my last 3 addresses, my place of work, and even details about the vehicles registered at my residence. It was too specific. I froze. My name, my work hours, my apartment, my car. Only someone who lived with me could know all that. Only someone who slept next to me, ate with me, kissed me. Good night, Sofia. My mind raced. I was spiraling, trying to calm myself down. Maybe there was another explanation. Maybe someone at work, maybe a neighbor, maybe someone followed me. The judge called for a short recess, said we would resume in 15 minutes. I was escorted into a waiting room a small hallway with a narrow window that overlooked the courthouse parking lot. And that was when I saw it, Sofia, standing in the sunlight, her hair tied back, arms folded, wearing the jacket I had bought her for Christmas. And next to her, the government attorney, the same man who had just presented my case. He leaned in, said something, she laughed, and then he kissed her. Not a quick, polite kiss, a kiss that said everything. It was the kind of kiss you give someone you have history with, the kind of kiss that doesn't lie. And I swear to you, for a second, I forgot how to breathe. I stepped back from the window. My legs gave out. I dropped to the bench and stared at the floor like it could explain everything. I had imagined betrayal before. I had felt the edge of it in her silence, in her coldness, in the way she flinched when I touched her. But seeing it made it real. Seeing it tore the world into pieces. I kept thinking about the night I proposed to her. We were in the kitchen. I had just gotten a small raise and bought her a ring with 2 paychecks. She cried when I gave it to her, said she had never felt so loved, said she would never let anything come between us. What do you do with memories like that once you realize they were built on lies? Back in the courtroom, my attorney returned and sat beside me. She noticed I was pale, shaking. She leaned over and whispered, "Are you okay?" I nodded. I lied. Because what else do you say when your entire life has been flipped in the span of 5 minutes? The judge resumed the session and asked if I wished to make a statement. My lawyer began to speak on my behalf, talking about my clean record, my years of labor, my community ties. But her voice was just background noise to me. All I could see was Sofia's face, smiling, her arms around the man whose job was to tear me away from everything I had built. If you've ever had your heart ripped from your chest in a place where you had no voice, I hope you leave a comment below. Just write, "I saw the truth with my own eyes." It might sound simple, but sharing your truth helps others survive theirs. And if this story is speaking something you've never had the words to say, please consider subscribing. You're not just clicking a button. You're joining a space where our pain is finally allowed to speak, where we don't have to pretend anymore. I sat in that cold courtroom chair long after the hearing ended, my wrists still marked red from the cuffs, my mind stuck in that moment by the window. That kiss, the way she tilted her head toward him like it was the most natural thing in the world, like the years we spent together were just some phase she outgrew. No explanation, no goodbye, just silence and a new man in the frame. The government attorney, Thomas Whitmore, looked composed when he returned to the room. Too composed. He straightened his tie, shuffled his papers, and avoided looking in my direction. It made sense now. The way he spoke about me during the hearing with rehearsed precision, as if I were a file, not a person. As if he had rehearsed his arguments not just for the case, but for her. My attorney, Ana, helped me up. She whispered, "We'll keep fighting this." But her voice felt far away, like I was hearing it through water. The rest of the day blurred together. I don't remember the van ride back to the detention center. I don't remember the guards unlocking the gates or the sound of the steel door clanking shut behind me. All I remember is sitting on that thin mattress in my cell, trying to make sense of how a life I thought was mine was never mine at all. I started replaying every moment I had ignored, every offhand excuse. Every late night she came home smelling like someone else's world. I remembered the time she told me her phone had died after she vanished for 5 hours. I remembered the dinner she skipped because of a sudden headache. I remembered the smile she gave me the night before I was taken. A smile that wasn't sad. It was final. Trust is not just about believing someone. It's about putting your safety in their hands, your heart, your name, and in my case, my freedom. I trusted her with everything. I never questioned it, because in our world, the immigrant world, all we have is each other. The system doesn't see us. The law doesn't care. So we hold on to our own like they're sacred. And that's what she shattered. Not just love, not just loyalty. She shattered the one thing I couldn't survive without, my sense of safety. The days inside the detention center moved like wet cement. Slow, heavy, quiet. I stopped speaking unless spoken to. I stopped eating. The guards noticed. One of them, a younger guy, slid an orange from his own lunch through the bars one afternoon. I thanked him, not with words, just a nod, because even kindness started to feel suspicious. I knew Sofia had turned me in, but I didn't know why. Was it money? Was it revenge? Was I just a stepping stone in her version of the American dream? I kept wondering what she was doing while I counted the cracks on the ceiling above my bunk. Was she sleeping in our bed? Was she cooking dinner in our kitchen? Or had she moved in with him already? Maybe she was wearing the necklace I gave her last Christmas while she helped him build a case to bury me. One night, I finally asked Ana the question that had been eating me alive. If someone in my home gave them the information, is there any way to prove it? She looked at me carefully. Maybe, but we would need access to the report, to the tip they received, and those details are often confidential. I nodded, but she saw it in my face, the desperation, the pain. Why? She asked. Do you think you know who it was? I couldn't even speak. I just stared at the wall. She said she would try. A week later, she returned with something in her hand, a printed document, heavily redacted but still legible in parts. It was the original tip that led to my arrest. There were checkboxes, names, timelines, and there, in small print, one line that made my heart stop. Subject resides with female partner. Possible incentive for removal action includes personal conflict. Source confirmed as reliable and personally known to subject. Ana looked up. Do you know who this is? I didn't answer. I didn't need to. She saw the answer in my silence. That night, back in my cell, I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling again, but this time not to escape. This time, I was planning, thinking, remembering. I thought about the first time I met Sofia's family, how her sister hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe, how her mother thanked me for taking care of her. I thought about how proud Sofia looked when she introduced me. Back then, I thought it was real, but now I wondered if I was ever anything more than a cover, a placeholder, a name she could use until she was ready to trade me in. I didn't cry that night. The tears had dried up. What came next wasn't grief. It was something colder, something sharper, resolve. Because there comes a point when betrayal stops hurting and starts fueling something deeper. A fire that burns through the lies. That makes you want answers. Not to fix anything, but to finally understand the kind of monster you gave your heart to. If you've ever felt that kind of betrayal, if someone you trusted with your life turned around and used your own love as a weapon against you, I invite you to leave a comment. Just write, I was loyal to the wrong person. Those words might seem small, but they are powerful. They are truth. And if this story is reflecting something you've never spoken out loud, consider subscribing. In this space, we listen, we witness, we heal in the open, one story at a time. There was something about Ana Delgado that didn't match the coldness of that courtroom. While everything else felt designed to erase me, to make me small, she looked me in the eyes and saw a human being. She was young, maybe in her early 30s, but the way she carried herself made you feel like she had seen more than most. She spoke quickly, clearly, but with a warmth that didn't belong in a place like that. And when I told her what I suspected about Sofia and the prosecutor, her face didn't flinch in disbelief. She just nodded and said, "Then let's find out the truth." She asked me for everything: names, dates, phone numbers, how long I had lived with Sofia, what she did for work, if she had ever mentioned anything strange about her past. I told her about the nights that didn't add up, the phone calls that ended when I walked into the room, the expensive things Sofia suddenly had no explanation for. I told her about the perfume I had never smelled before and the hours she said she was working but never came home tired. Ana took notes. She never interrupted. And then she said something I wasn't expecting. This might go deeper than you think. She left and came back 3 days later. It felt like a lifetime. 3 more days of the same gray meals, the same echoing footsteps in the hallway outside my cell, the same dreams where I was still free, still laying bricks under the yours. Sun, still believing that love meant something. When Ana returned, she didn't sit down. She stood in front of the plexiglass and said, "You need to hear what I found." She had requested access to public records and cross-referenced them with Sofia's name. What she found was a pattern. Sofia had been listed as a witness in another immigration-related case 5 years ago. The subject of that case was a Guatemalan man who had also been detained after an anonymous tip. The charges against him were nearly identical to mine. Same kind of information leaked. Same method of arrest. That man had been deported. He never made it past his second hearing. Ana found traces of financial activity between Sofia and a legal account belonging to Thomas Whitmore, the prosecutor on my case. Not direct payments, but deposits into a shared account that listed a trust fund. She pulled phone records that showed frequent calls between the two over the last year, dozens of them, some lasting less than a minute, some in the middle of the night. And then there were the travel logs. 2 weekends, both logged under conference expenses, one in Miami, one in Atlanta. Both Sofia and Whitmore had booked rooms in the same hotel on the same dates. She printed everything out and slid it across the table to me. I remember staring at the documents. My hands were shaking. I didn't even know what to say. The woman I had loved, the woman I built a life with, was part of something bigger, something calculated. I wasn't just collateral damage in a breakup. I was a target in a game I never knew I was playing. Ana sat down finally and leaned in close. Her voice was low but intense. This isn't just betrayal. This is a setup. And if we can prove that this was done with malicious intent, that she collaborated with a federal official for personal gain, we might have a case for entrapment, maybe even immigration relief. I felt my lungs fill with something I hadn't felt in weeks. Not quite hope, but something close. A flicker, a pulse. She warned me that it wouldn't be easy, that people like Whitmore protect each other, that going after a federal prosecutor meant stepping into dangerous waters. But I didn't care. I had already lost everything. My freedom, my dignity, my home. What else was there left to take? That night I didn't sleep again. But this time, it wasn't from fear, it was from fury. The kind of fury that comes from knowing someone looked you in the eye every day and planned your downfall behind your back. I thought about every time I kissed Sofia's forehead while she pretended to sleep. I thought about every meal I cooked, every dollar I gave, every secret I shared. And I realized none of it mattered to her. She had used me, not just emotionally, but legally. Sofia was part of something I hadn't even imagined, a pipeline, a strategy. Find undocumented men, get close, gather information, hand them over, then disappear. And somehow, Whitmore was involved, maybe for money, maybe
Favors.
maybe just for power. Ana said she was going to file a formal request for records from the Department of Homeland Security. She also planned to approach a journalist she knew, someone who had written about immigration corruption before. She asked for my permission to share my story. I told her yes. I told her to share everything. If you've ever uncovered a truth so ugly it changed everything you believed about someone you loved, I want you to take a moment and leave a comment. Just type, "I saw the mask fall." You don't need to explain more than that. Those words say it all. And if hearing stories like this makes you feel less alone in your own pain, I invite you to subscribe. You're not just supporting a channel. You're standing with people who have been broken and are trying to piece themselves back together, one voice at a time. Ana was right. The deeper we looked, the darker it got. What started as heartbreak was now unfolding into something far more calculated, more monstrous than I could have imagined. I wasn't just a man who got left behind. I was a mark, a file, a move on a chessboard where real people got sacrificed for someone else's victory. She came back with more evidence a few days later. I remember the way her hands trembled slightly as she placed the folder on the metal table between us. She was composed, professional as always, but I could tell this wasn't just another case for her anymore. It had become personal. Inside the folder were emails, dozens of them, leaked from an anonymous source who had access to communication between local prosecutors and ICE officers, someone who believed the system had gone too far. One email, dated 6 weeks before my arrest, included a subject line that read, "Ruiz case, personal witness confirmed." The body of the email was simple. "Target lives with informant. Will testify if needed. Make the arrest tight. No loose ends. No loose ends." That's what I had become. A problem to be erased. Ana's voice was tight when she read it out loud. This wasn't just betrayal, Jose. This was coordination. They planned this. I asked her if there was anything we could do now. Anything that could turn this around. She nodded, slowly. "There's a form of relief called VAWA," she said. "It's for immigrants who have been victims of abuse or extreme cruelty by a U.S. citizen or permanent resident spouse. If we can prove you were manipulated, used, and turned in as part of an abusive relationship, you might qualify. I blinked at her. But we were never married. Common law marriages are considered in some cases, she said. And even if not, the abuse you suffered might still qualify under other provisions. The key is proving that you were used, that you were emotionally and strategically exploited. The thought of applying for protection based on victimhood felt like swallowing glass. I had worked so hard to be strong, to build, to protect, and now, here I was, being asked to open my wounds and let the world see just how broken I had become. But I said yes, because pride doesn't keep you safe in a cell. She started building the case, gathering statements, transcribing our recorded conversations, pulling up the financial records between Sofia and Whitmore. She reached out to my old co-workers, some of whom remembered the weird tension between me and Sofia toward the end. One even told her about a conversation he had overheard where Sofia said, "He's not going to be around much longer anyway." That was the moment I realized just how far back this went. She never loved me. Not really. I think she loved the idea of being needed, of having control. But the moment I became inconvenient, disposable, she tossed me to the system like I was nothing. And still, I couldn't stop thinking about her face. That smile. How easily she gave it to him. The worst part of betrayal is not the lie itself. It's the way it poisons the memories. It turns your entire past into a question mark. Was any of it real? Did she ever mean the words she said? Or was it all part of the script? As Ana continued building my case, something unexpected happened. A letter arrived. It was from my mother. She had heard from one of my cousins that I had been detained. She didn't know the details, but her words broke me. "Mijo," she wrote, "I don't know where you are or what is happening, but I want you to know I pray for you every night. You are my son, and I know your heart. I raised you to be kind, to be honest. No matter what they say about you, I believe in who you are." I read that letter over and over. I slept with it under my pillow. Because in a place where everything is stripped from you, even your name, those words felt like a heartbeat. They reminded me that I was still someone, that I still mattered. Ana filed the first motion a week later. The government tried to fight it. They claimed there was no abuse, no evidence of coercion. But Ana was ready. She had a stack of exhibits, photos, texts, bank statements, witnesses, and when the judge asked if I wanted to make a statement, I stood up and told my story. Not just the facts, but the truth. I told him about building homes under the sun while America turned its back on me, about the woman I loved and the silence she gave me when I needed her most. I told him about the kiss in the parking lot, about the documents, about being dragged from my home in chains by a system I once believed might protect me. And when I finished, the room was quiet, not out of pity, but out of weight. Because some stories carry a truth that cannot be ignored. If you've ever had to fight just to be seen, just to be believed, I want you to take a breath and write it below. Just type, "My truth matters." It does. Your truth matters more than you know. And if you've made it this far, if you've listened to every word and felt even a flicker of recognition, I hope you subscribe, not just for me, but for the next person who needs to hear that they're not alone in their pain. There is a strange kind of silence that lives in detention centers. It is not the absence of sound. It is the absence of being seen. Days blend into each other like watercolors left out in the rain. Faces become shadows. Time becomes meaningless. The only thing that keeps you grounded is the hope that someone, somewhere, is still fighting for you. For me, that person was Ana Delgado. Weeks passed. My case was officially under review, which meant no decisions, just waiting. Endless waiting. And in that waiting, I learned something dangerous. The human mind, when stripped of distraction, has nowhere to go but inward. I started replaying everything, not just Sofia and the betrayal, but my entire life, the long days in the sun, the way I used to dream of opening my own business, the way I always promised my mother I'd bring her to the US one day. It was like I was watching my life from a distance, through a cracked window I couldn't open. And then something happened. that shook me deeper than I expected. A new inmate was brought into our block. He looked familiar. His name was Marco, from Veracruz. I hadn't seen him in almost 8 years. He used to live down the hall from me back when I first moved into the apartment with Sofia. He used to ask to borrow my tools all the time. He recognized me first. "Jose," he said through the bars, "is that really you?" I nodded, stunned. He had aged. His eyes were tired, but his voice was the same. We talked through the events, quietly, carefully. He asked what happened. I told him everything, every twisted part. Sofia, Whitmore, the betrayal, the case. He listened in silence. Then he told me something I wasn't ready to hear. She did the same to me. Those words hit like a hammer to the chest. He told me he had dated Sofia briefly before I did, just for a few months. Nothing serious, he said, but things turned strange quickly. She asked too many questions, wanted to know where he worked, what days he was off, if he had any relatives in the States. Then one day, immigration showed up at his job. He was arrested, detained, and eventually deported. He had crossed the border again and was caught, which brought him back into the system. He said he never had proof, but he always suspected her. Now, hearing my story, he was sure. This wasn't just a pattern. This was a practice. Sofia had done this before, maybe more than once. Maybe to men I would never meet. Maybe it was her plan all along. Build trust, gather information, then disappear into the shadows while the system did the rest. I told Ana the next day. She was furious. Not just because it confirmed our suspicions, but because it opened the door to something bigger. She said it could show intent, that it proved Sofia had a strategy, that she was not just a cold partner, but a serial informant with a personal connection to a government official. Ana filed a request for the court to allow testimony from Marco. She also requested access to immigration cases from the past 10 years linked to Sofia's name. The government fought back. They tried to dismiss it as irrelevant. They said Marco was a criminal, that his testimony was not credible. But Ana was relentless. And while the legal war raged outside, I fought a different war inside, the war of memory. I began to write, not just letters to my mother, but to myself. I wrote about the man I used to be, the boy who dreamed of building something, the worker who took pride in every wall he raised, the husband who believed love could heal anything. I wrote because it was the only way I could remember that I was more than this number they had given me, A725493. That number echoed in my head at night. Every time I heard it, I felt a piece of my identity fall away. But my words brought those pieces back. They reminded me that I was still Jose, still human, still here. One night, one of the guards pulled me aside. He had been quiet the whole time I was there, never spoke more than necessary. But this time, he looked at me differently. "I heard about your case," he said. I just wanted to say, "Don't stop fighting. My brother went through something similar. Took him 3 years, but he made it out. Don't give up." I didn't expect that. It was one of those moments that don't seem like much, but stay with you forever. Because in places designed to crush you, small kindnesses become lifelines. Days later, Ana returned with news. The judge had agreed to hear Marco's testimony, and they were now officially investigating the relationship between Sofia and Whitmore. It wasn't a victory, not yet, but it was movement. And in places like this, movement means everything. If you've ever been trapped in a situation that made you question your worth, if you've ever been reduced to a number, a problem, a file on someone's desk, I want you to say it loud below. Just right. I am more than a number, because you are. And if you feel a spark in your chest when you hear these words, if something inside you says, "I've felt this too," I hope you'll subscribe. We are building something here. Not walls, not cases, but connection. A place where the forgotten are remembered, where the invisible are finally seen. The morning Marco testified, the air inside the courtroom felt heavier than usual. Not louder, not more chaotic, just dense, like something big was about to break, and the walls knew it before we did. I sat beside Ana at the defendant's table, both of us silent, holding on to the same thin string of hope. Marco walked in, his wrists chained in front of him, his back straight. He wasn't just speaking for himself, he was speaking for me, and maybe even for the dozens of men who came before us, who had no one left to speak for them. His testimony was quiet but clear. He spoke about how he met Sofia, how she seemed overly curious about his life, how she asked about his status, how she encouraged him to trust her, only to vanish days before he was detained. He described the timeline, how she knew exactly when and where he worked, how she asked him questions that only someone planning something would ask. Ana followed with questions that tied his experience directly to mine. The same woman, the same methods, the same end result: detention, silence, vanishing. When he stepped down, the room stayed quiet. Even the government attorney avoided looking up from his notes. I remember looking at the judge, his face unreadable, stoic, but his fingers tapped slowly on the desk. I didn't know what that meant, but it was something. Anything was better than the blank wall I had stared at for months. After court, I was taken back to my cell, but something inside me had shifted. For the first time, I didn't feel entirely alone. Marco had put his name on the line. Ana had gone to war for me. Even the guard with the quiet voice and tired eyes was starting to speak more than just instructions. People were beginning to believe. That night, I had a dream. I was walking through my old neighborhood in Michoacan. The streets were empty. The houses were smaller than I remembered. I passed by the old bakery where my mother used to buy pan dulce. And then I saw her, my mother, standing by the corner. She didn't speak. She just opened her arms. I ran to her, but every step I took made her fade. I kept running. She kept disappearing. I woke up choking on my own breath. I sat there in the dark, alone on that metal bunk, and I cried. Not because I was weak, but because I was still here, still human, still fighting. Ana visited again the next day. This time, she brought a letter. It was from someone I didn't recognize, a woman named Lucia Delgado. She had been in a similar situation, trapped in a relationship with someone who used her status to control her. She said she had seen a video about my case online, that someone had shared part of my story, that it had given her the strength to speak out too. She ended the letter with a single sentence: "Your truth helped me find mine." Those words broke something open in me, because maybe this wasn't just about getting out. Maybe this was about making sure none of this happened again. That night, I asked the guard for a pencil and paper. He hesitated, then nodded. I began writing everything I could remember. Every detail, every inconsistency in Sofia's stories, every red flag I had ignored, every name I could think of who might have been used the same way I was. I wrote for hours, my hand cramped, my eyes blurred, but I kept going. When Ana saw the pages, she smiled. "You're not just surviving this," she said. "You're building something that matters." The following week, Ana submitted a supplemental petition to strengthen our case. She included Marco's testimony, my written account, witness letters. She included evidence of financial transactions between Sofia and Whitmore that had now come under formal review. And for the first time since my arrest, we got a response that wasn't just delay or denial. The court scheduled a hearing to reconsider the terms of my detention. Ana told me this could be a turning point. If the judge ruled in our favor, I could be released while the rest of the case proceeded. It didn't mean freedom yet, but it meant air, sunlight, a bed without bars. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. I sat on the edge of my bunk, staring at the paper where I had written my story, now full of creases and smudged ink. I thought about my mother, about Ana, about Marco, about the woman named Lucia who had found courage through mine. I thought about every man in that detention center who still hadn't found his voice, and I made a promise. If I got out, I would not disappear quietly. If this story has stirred something inside you, if you've ever been silenced by someone who held power over you, I want you to write it in the comments. Just say, "My voice will not be taken." You are not alone. Your voice matters. And if you felt even a flicker of hope while listening to these words, I invite you to subscribe. This is more than a story. This is a movement of people reclaiming what was stolen from them. Together, we rise. Together, we remember. Together, we heal. The morning of my release hearing, I woke before the guards. The world outside was still cloaked in that heavy silence that blankets detention centers before dawn. I sat on the edge of my bunk with my feet planted on the cold concrete floor, eyes fixed on the door, heart refusing to slow down. I was preparing for a battle I had already fought in my dreams 1,000 times, but this time it would be real. This time I would speak not as a prisoner or a file or a mistake, but as a man with something left to lose. They brought me into the courtroom in handcuffs, but something had shifted. The cuffs were still cold, the guards still firm, but I walked differently, straighter, firmer. I was not the same man they dragged in months ago, hollow and silent, full now. I was full of truth, full of stories, full of voices behind me I had never heard before, but who were cheering me on from screens, from cells, from cities I'd never seen. Ana stood beside me, more than just my attorney now. She had become my witness, my translator, my sword. She had taken my pain and given it form, something the system couldn't look away from anymore. The judge entered, and the room settled into stillness. Ana began to speak. She laid everything out, not just facts, but the pattern, the intent, the betrayal. She spoke of Marco's testimony, of Sofia's previous involvement in other cases, of the financial link between her and Whitmore. She detailed the abuse, the psychological manipulation, the personal exploitation wrapped in legal procedure. Then she handed over the letters from my co-workers, from my mother, from the woman named Lucia, who had found her courage after hearing my story. Each page was a lifeline, each sentence a step closer to the surface, drowning for so long. Then, the judge asked if I wanted to say anything. I stood slowly. My knees ached from months of cold floors and tension. My voice was hoarse, but it held. I told him about my first day in America, how I stepped off that bus in Texas and breathed air that felt heavy with promise, how I found work, built homes, sent money back to my mother who prayed for me every night. I told him about Sofia, how she laughed when we danced in the kitchen, how she looked me in the eyes when I gave her the ring, how none of it prepared me for the silence she gave me the day they took me away. I spoke of the nights in detention, of the number A725493 that nearly erased my name, of the hours I spent staring at a wall, trying to remember who I was before betrayal rewrote me. And I told him that I was not asking for pity. I was asking for recognition, that I had been used strategically, intentionally, legally, and I was still here, still human, still standing. The judge was silent a long time after I finished. His eyes flicked between the pages before him, his fingers steepled under his chin. Finally, he spoke. He acknowledged the evidence. He stated that while the full investigation was ongoing, the court recognized the substantial risk of injustice if I remained in detention. He ordered my immediate release under humanitarian parole while the proceedings continued. I didn't hear the rest of his words. I couldn't. My ears rang. My knees buckled. I sat down before I fell. Ana squeezed my shoulder, and for the first time in months, I exhaled without fear. They unchained me an hour later, not in some dramatic ceremony, just a quiet click, a nod, and a plain envelope with my belongings. The clothes felt foreign on my skin. The sunlight outside the courthouse burned my eyes. The world was loud, alive, and terrifying, but it was mine again. Ana drove me to a small shelter that agreed to take me in while I rebuilt. The staff didn't ask questions. They gave me a room, a blanket, and a meal I could barely eat because my stomach was still trying to remember what food felt like. That night, I sat on the edge of a real bed and stared at the city lights blinking in the distance. I listened to the hum of traffic, the laughter in the hallway. I was not free yet, but I was no longer invisible. I called my mother. She answered on the first ring. Her voice cracked. I cried. We said nothing and everything in that silence. And for the first time, I let myself believe I might make it through this. If you have ever felt caged, whether by walls or by people who made you feel small, I want you to share your strength below. Write, I remember who I am, because remembering is the first step to reclaiming. And if this story has echoed something you have felt in your bones, I ask you to subscribe, not out of habit, but because this space is yours too. A place where we don't turn away from the pain. We tell it, we honor it, and we rise together. There is a strange moment after you are released when you realize freedom is not the same as safety. I stepped out of the courtroom, a man with his feet on the sidewalk, but his soul still pacing behind steel doors. Everything was louder, colors were sharper, even the air had weight. It was like stepping into a world that had kept spinning without me, and now expected me to catch up without stumbling. At the shelter, I tried to sleep. but sleep felt like a luxury I hadn't earned. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard chains. Every creak in the hallway became a door unlocking. I had to remind myself over and over again that I wasn't back in that cell, that I wasn't waiting for someone to tell me what time to eat, what time to breathe, what time to beg. Ana checked on me daily. She didn't have to. Her work could have ended in that courtroom, but she kept showing up, bringing updates, legal briefs, messages from people I'd never met who had heard my story and sent letters. She brought one from a boy in California who wrote, "You make me feel braver. My dad is undocumented too." His name was Mateo. He drew a picture of a man in a cage, and then another picture of the same man standing on a mountain. I taped that drawing to the wall beside my bed. Some mornings, it was the only thing that kept me from falling apart. But outside those walls, the case was heating up. Ana had gone further. She filed a formal complaint against Whitmore with the Office of Professional Responsibility. She also submitted an ethics complaint to the State Bar Association. More importantly, she managed to get one of her contacts at a local news station interested. They were running a story, not just about me, but about the system, about how immigrants were being used as tools, not people. The journalist, a woman named Maribel Cruz, was the daughter of immigrants herself. She knew the smell of fear. She knew what it meant to hold your breath every time a knock came at the door. She asked to interview me. I hesitated, not because I was afraid to speak, but because I didn't know if my voice could carry the weight of all those who couldn't speak for themselves. But then I remembered Mateo's letter, and I said yes. The interview was raw. There were no polished lines, no rehearsed answers, just truth. I told her about Sofia, about Whitmore, about the betrayal that came wrapped in affection and legality. I told her how it feels to be invisible in a country you helped build, to be loved and used in the same breath, to be disposable in a system that was never designed to see you as whole. The story aired 3 nights later. Ana called me and told me to turn on the TV. I sat in the common room of the shelter with 5 other men, all in various stages of their own immigration struggles. The room was quiet as my face appeared on the screen, my voice, my name, not a number, not a criminal, a person. After the segment, one of the men, Rafael, said nothing for a long time. Then he whispered, "I thought I was the only one." And I realized that was the real victory, not the case, not the legal process, but the connection. The reminder that none of us are alone in our silence. The fallout came fast. Whitmore was placed on administrative leave. Internal investigations were launched. Other names began surfacing, other stories, other men. It was like kicking a hornet's nest and watching the truth pour out, stinging everyone who thought they were untouchable. Sofia vanished. No one could find her. No last known address, no workplace, just gone. Part of me still wanted to ask her why she did it, why she chose to turn love into leverage. But maybe some questions don't deserve answers. Maybe survival is its own form of closure. I started writing again, not just letters, stories, poems. I found a local community center that offered art therapy sessions for immigrants and refugees. At first, I just watched. Then, I picked up a brush. I painted hands, always hands, reaching, breaking, holding, healing. It was the only way I could explain what it felt like to be held and hurt by the same system. Ana told me my full hearing was scheduled in 2 months. It would be the final step in my journey to stay in the U.S., legally, permanently. But this time, I wasn't afraid. I had truth on my side. I had people. I had a voice. And I had Mateo's drawing still taped to the wall. If you've ever rebuilt yourself from the ashes of betrayal, if you've ever stood up with shaking legs and still moved forward, I want you to leave something in the comments. Just write, "I kept walking." That's all it takes. Those 3 words carry more weight than any judgment ever could. And if this story has held a mirror to something you've lived but never said aloud, I invite you to subscribe. This isn't just a channel. It's a lighthouse, a place for those who are lost, searching, or just trying to remember that they matter. The day I finally walked out of the shelter, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Air, real air, not recycled, stale air that smelled of despair and cleaning products, fresh air. The sun warmed my skin in a way that reminded me of my early days in Florida, before the arrests, before the betrayals, before I became a number. I breathed deeply and counted each inhale like a blessing. Freedom didn't feel dramatic. It felt like a quiet, steady heartbeat, something I almost forgot I had the right to. Ana was there, of course. She smiled at me, but it wasn't the professional smile from court. It was personal, warm, proud. She said, "You've earned this, Jose. You've survived what most people can't even imagine, and now it's your life again." I wanted to hug her, but I held back. Words felt inadequate. There was no thank you big enough, no gesture that could truly honor the months she had spent building a case, digging through evidence, finding the threads of truth in a tapestry designed to destroy me. The journey wasn't over, not legally, not emotionally. Sofia was gone, Whitmore's career was under investigation, and I still had hearings ahead. But something inside me had shifted. I was no longer the frightened man in chains, powerless and silenced. I was José Alejandro Ruiz again, and this time I was fully awake to my own worth. I found a small apartment in Jacksonville, nothing luxurious, but mine. My name on the mailbox, my hands on the locks, my footprints on the floor. I unpacked slowly, each item a symbol of reclamation. The dishes, the clothes I had left in storage, these were all mine. Mine to care for, mine to protect. I slept that first night under my own roof and allowed myself to imagine a future where betrayal didn't define me. A future where my story wasn't just survival, but triumph. I returned to work, not on construction sites for strangers who didn't care, but on projects where I could rebuild, create, and leave a mark that mattered. I took pride in every nail, every brick, every wall I raised, and every time I worked, I remembered that I had fought to stay here, to be seen, to be heard, and to reclaim my life. Evenings were the hardest at first. Quiet moments where the silence reminded me of the chains and the empty bed in the detention center. But I found a way to fill them. I started mentoring young immigrants, sharing my story with them, guiding them so they wouldn't have to walk through the shadows I had endured alone. I realized my voice, once silenced, could now carry others out of darkness. Letters arrived from people I didn't know, from people who had heard my story through Ana or through the small news segment she had helped produce. Each letter was a reminder that I wasn't alone in my pain, that the betrayal I suffered had resonance far beyond my own life. A young man wrote, "I never thought I would speak to anyone about my father's deportation, but reading your story gave me courage." Another wrote, "I feel less afraid now. Thank you for telling the truth." These words became a lifeline. They reminded me that the battle wasn't only about surviving. It was about transforming survival into hope, and through that hope, creating something bigger than myself. I think now about the life I could have had if I had never crossed the border, if I had stayed in Guerrero, if I had trusted the wrong person less. But I don't dwell on it, because every hardship, every betrayal, every tear shed in silence led me to this moment, standing fully in my own story, with my name, my life, and my dignity intact. Ana called me one afternoon. She had news. The judge had ruled favorably on my final petition. I would receive permanent protection under immigration law. I could stay in the country I had built my life in. I could no longer be deported. The weight I had carried for years, the constant fear, finally lifted. I cried, not from despair, but from relief, from triumph, from the raw, beautiful feeling of being allowed to continue my life on my own terms. Walking down the street. That afternoon, I stopped at a small coffee shop. The scent of fresh bread and roasted beans reminded me of mornings in Mexico. I sipped my coffee slowly, savoring each moment. I knew my journey had left scars, but it had also left wisdom, resilience, and a story worth telling. A story I would continue to share, not just for myself, but for anyone who feels trapped, betrayed, or silenced. To everyone watching this story, thank you. Thank you for taking the time to sit with my journey, to witness and to honor it. Your presence matters. Your attention gives life to stories that might otherwise remain unheard. If this story has moved you, inspired you, or reminded you of your own strength, I invite you to click on the next video appearing on your screen. There are more stories waiting to be shared, more voices to be heard, and more courage to be found. Every view, every comment, and every subscription helps keep these truths alive. And together, we continue to honor resilience, hope, and survival. Thank you for being part of this journey. Thank you for listening. And thank you for remembering that no matter what life takes from you, the power to reclaim your story will always remain.